Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I would urge you to come a little bit further. We are not that much, so I think it would be nicer if we are nearer. Don't feel shy. Come on. This is the chapter of civil society. Things should be even more casual. Okay. Thank you very much. And I've seen some of your faces were already here from yesterday, so I guess well, there are two ways to look at it. Whether we continue from where we stopped over yesterday, but I would like just to clarify a number of things. So in order for the discussion from here on to make more sense. And so yesterday we discussed on the political, probably on the more general agenda or the outlook, and the purpose of this one in a way was to narrow down the topic of today more on the issue of civil society and what is its role in the area or even outside civil society organizations, as we might argue here, in order to promote a positive narrative and agenda in the region. So first thing that I would like to clarify here is that this is an activity within the family of the Anna Lindh Foundation. And I don't know how many of you would love what the Anna Lindh Foundation is all about. I would mention it because the reason I would discuss it a bit is in order to explain why we offer this interpretation of what civil society is about, rather than the official or the academic one that what really civil society is about. So the Anna Lindh Foundation is a non-governmental, an international or non-governmental, actually it is an intergovernmental organization within the framework of the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership. This means is that in the Ministries of Foreign Affairs are part of the board of directors of the Anna Lindh Foundation. It was established in order to give a push to the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, realizing that only concentrating on the political and security, economic and commercial aspects or basket, as they used to say, it wasn't enough, and they should pay more attention to two important and interrelated domains: the cultural and the social domain of it. In that respect, the official or the whole name of this institution was called the Euro-Mediterranean Anna Lindh Foundation for the Dialogue Between Cultures. In that respect, so the whole idea is how can we find ways in order to push, elaborate, develop the skills that are needed so that societies on both sides of the Mediterranean would cooperate and work together. And through that, the theory is that then the prospects or the odds for a more understanding of each other and a peaceful and creative coexistence would be increased. And the two vehicles of it was, on the one hand, civil society at large and the intercultural dialogue per se. Yet, when we mention civil society, in a way, indirectly, what we refer to is the non-governmental sector. So in that respect, if you see the membership of the network, because it's set up as a network of networks, you will find schools, you will find galleries. It makes perfect sense. Can you really exclude a theater team or a theater company from intercultural dialogue? But at the same time, the notion of culture is it's wide enough not to include the arts and letters. It's only the cultural domain. And in that respect, sometimes, because I'm heading the Greek National Network, when I'm being asked whether if it's intercultural dialogue perspective, can we join because we are, for instance, the body of a medicine school? And I said, yes. The idea is that we offer opportunities for the societies of both North and South to cooperate and discuss and work together. Because primarily, at least during those years, and it has been identified that it makes more sense and it's more effective not only to know about each other, but to work together and build together projects and so on and so forth. So in that respect, when we mention here the civil society, we mean the organized segments of society at large, which are not included in the government sector. So having said that, the structure of today, we thought that we changed it a little bit, and we have 5 major questions, so that I will address the 5 questions, then you intervene with some small interventions, and then we move on to the second question. I would just name them in general, the state of the play, what's the condition of the area, so that we can see, as you've mentioned yesterday, unless we identify what do we mean by the region, and therefore the topics that are included, then we cannot see whether civil society, this one, can play a role or have a role to play. So that's the first one. The second one is to see the civil society in this domain, in the southeastern or in the Eastern Mediterranean region, the state of the art domestically, and whether we have only, can we really talk about only local or national civil society organizations, or do we have international civil society organizations that operate in the region and can have a role? Then we move on to the capabilities, the obstacles, and the threats and the limits of this one. To talk about in general what the civil society, without identifying that there is a limit to what we can expect for it, it would be useless in a way, because the expectation would be extremely high that we can never meet. And then we move on. You already mentioned we already mentioned 2 aspects yesterday, and that's why I didn't raise the question, because we thought it would make more sense to have here. What other actors, non-state actors, can be included in this discussion? Discussing it with Dimitris, he raised the issue, said, well, but then, you know, if we talk about non-state actors, then Hamas might be one of them. And I argued, because this is my understanding of civil society, no, Hamas cannot be included in civil society because it is a state institution. Quasi-state, pseudo-state, but it's still a state. It has access and the monopoly of coercion within the Gaza district, and therefore it cannot be viewed as such. But other institutions, when we discussed it with Anach, mentioned a very important institution in my mind, and I think something that we discussed, for instance, academia. We mentioned yesterday the enterprises or the corporates or the media. So this is the discussion, how it's going to be. So I will start a little bit bringing back actually what you have mentioned earlier on, and said what's the state of the play in the region. We have identified the region, and we identified a number of issues. So I would just name them here. Sovereignty-related issues, environmental challenges, energy resources and production, refugees and immigrants, the democratic backslide, and interrelated to this issue is the good governance of the states and the region. And then we have more domestic-related issues like the population outlook in relation to the emergence of youth population on the one hand, aging population on the other hand, the issues we touch upon employability, and then of course the issues of economy, and a very key issue for me, because for me it's a very important issue, whether civil society can really play a role when on the agenda you have issues of national security, for instance. But then we also have the notion of human security, which is another aspect that we can look at it. So since yesterday we have identified that let's say we can identify domestic or cross-state issues of friction and debate. We talk about Syria. Syria is probably the melting pot of everything. It's cross-state as well as domestic issues that of friction within it, because of different groups that identify themselves as have an identity which could not coincide with the other and probably with the state. But then we have Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue, or vice versa, or Lebanon, or Syria, or Iran to that respect. Then we have the Greek-Turkish or the Cypriot-Turkish issue, and other issues that we can identify. We might even expand it and see the Arab vis-a-vis the Israeli community as a state, which I'd like to make a criticism of the Anna Lindh Foundation, even though it's intercultural dialogue, very little or non-actual activities take place between Arabs and Israelis, whereas you can find within the Erasmus programs, Israeli institutions cooperating with the Egyptian ones, for instance. So just identifying this one, I would like to ask you, how do you view from your perspective with regard to those issues, what's the state of the art of a civil society in Israel, in Turkey, in the Arab countries, and maybe in Greece, vis-a-vis those issues in general, and in general as a civil society, and in theory, whether the civil society can really have a role, and then in particular with your own perspective. And I think we'll start with my good friend Anat.
Well, there's a lot of questions and issues, and thank you for giving this overview. It's very helpful. So there is no real database that analyze the activities of civil society organization across the region in a comparative way. There's a lot of information about Greece, about Cyprus, about Israel, Turkey, and others, but you have the names, the activities, but other than that, it's very limited. So I think the first thing we need to do is actually to create some kind of serious research and database that involve not just organizations that are registered, but also those who are active and have a degree of success. And I also want to say that there is a huge difference between Greece, that is part of the EU and have a very strong civil society, very active, and let's say Egypt, the other side of the Mediterranean, that have civil society, but it's rather limited. So there, as you said, there's different organization involved, and let me just say what we see in the region as actors in this field. So indeed, it's a very wide, non-governmental arena. You included NGOs, grassroots movements, professional association, perhaps, like young professionals and others, think tank, academia at large, faith-based groups, and I would also add to it municipalities. Although they receive a lot of their funds from the government, they often, in different countries, have completely different policies, sometimes opposing the government, and they work with their local communities. So I would include them in this basket. So that's for the players. And I want to start by saying that the strength of civil society is in its ability to mobilize people quickly with legitimacy, unlike the state. I'll give only one example from Israel. October 8th till October 10th, 10,000 volunteers in 2 days, okay, or 3 days. 10,000 volunteers enter the field in different capacities, and later on, many more. Almost every neighborhood in big towns was organized in a way that was not, present before. So the ability of civil society to mobilize people, to prepare food for people in need, to send packages with needed clothes, whether inside Israel or outside, like to Syria. Okay, right now, the ability of civil society is incredible. So that's important to remember. So this is as far as who are involved. I will say that especially in Israel, high-tech companies are very much involved. They have social responsibility departments, and they work with communities, and they respond either for emergencies or on everyday basis. It's part of their DNA. So it's also a player, the business community. So that's as far as the players, and I think the importance is clear. Do you want me to stop here or move to other questions?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Just for the actors.
Well, as far as actors are concerned in Turkey, that's debatable. We don't agree with the definition. What is the definition of exactly of civil society? Different actors are pushing for different kind of definitions to include different kinds of institutions. The current government has fondness for historical Ottoman past. And in that past, of course, there is this Islamic concept of vakıf, which is foundation in modern English. No matter the origin, especially in the Ottoman lens, the origins of the vakıf was not really Islamic pity, but in a way to segregate, secreted your riches. You know, the Ottoman government and the state did not allow private accumulation of wealth. So those who are in the power establish different foundations so that they can keep their own money and give it to their descendants. But nevertheless, there is this huge tradition coming from the Ottoman past. For example, we have historic foundations like 300 years old foundations, administrating 5-6 big mosques in Istanbul, hundreds of shops, and using this money for supporting the poor, etc., etc. So the government has this, current government has this fondness for this, and Turkey has an official state department to run all these foundations. But of course, it's debatable whether they are civil or not. Most of them now belong to the government, this administered by the government institution. Then, because of this tradition, with the coming to power of the AKP, various what you call faith-based groups, in Turkey we call them religious orders, they started establishing hundreds of foundations and associations. And to show you how big they could be, one example is now outlawed Fethullah Gülen Group, for example. Yeah, they controlled billions of dollars, had businesses, hospitals, schools, TVs, newspapers, whatnot. It's not the only one, obviously, but this is one that got in trouble with the government. But there are other religious orders who are doing this kind of thing, and they are called civil society. That's why it's debatable in Turkey whether these religious-based organizations are civil society, because the people, let's say so-called members of that kind of society, they have to follow the orders, kind of hierarchical orders coming from up from down. So it's not much civic in that sense, or independent. Then, of course, we have what I call real civil society, which has always, in the modern sense, maybe started in 1970s on in Turkey, and that always have struggled for various reasons. And one, I think some of these reasons are also applicable to other countries, is one is the lack of resources, obviously. I mean, if you are willing to sacrifice your time and devote your time and energy and etc., it's difficult to find money. And we don't have this American, I think Israeli also, and definitely Greek tradition of giving money from the rich companies or the rich people or big companies, philanthropy. We don't have that tradition much in Turkey, which has now being developed maybe last 30 years. But again, the big holding companies doing philanthropy, they do their own civil society initiatives. So like Koç Group or Sabancı Group or the university, my university, Kadir Has Group. When they want to invest in something in civil society, they establish their own foundations with their own names and they do their own things, which means that as an individual civil society institution, I cannot go to the Koç Group and get money because they said, we are already giving it to the Koç University or one of the think tanks they are established. So again, that's leads to problems of foundation and resources. You have to go to the government to fund resources. When you go to the government, then you know what's the problems. And also because Turkey is a country always at odds with everything else, it's very difficult to categorize. We don't fit nicely to international categorization of fundings. Dimitri would remember we used to get funding, for example, Black Sea Trust of German Marshall Fund for our projects about the Black Sea issues. Then Turkey was left out of that because Turkey was kind of categorized differently than the other Black Sea countries. In Europe, we are not a member country, but we are not a partner country either. We are a negotiating country, which put us in a different category as far as the foundation funds are concerned. Same with the US and everything else. So that's kind of creates problems. Still looking to the actors, now I would, as already classified, the state kind of is an actor, it's a huge, so many foundations. The big businesses themselves have become actors through this, so their own initiatives. But also you come across crazy people like myself who establish these things with their time and energy and struggle to be alive. Whether we have an impact, that's a different story. And in most of these kind of really civilian initiatives are one issue institutes or entities focusing on education, focusing on health, sometimes focusing on women, which has become quite fashionable in Turkey in last 10, 15 years, women rights and equality and everything. And of course, again, this links up to the resources, because this was the resources coming from the United States and Western Europe. Everybody focused on that. But now I don't know what's going to happen with the MAGA people. So I suppose everybody's going to move away from the equality businesses, environmental businesses, and then look into the strategic issues and etc. Right. That's more or less about the actors in Turkey. I have other problems to complain, but let me stop there.
Yeah, my question is, so where do you see, in relation to the topics that we identified yesterday, where did you see the majority of the focus of the civil society organizations in this neighborhood, and whether there is an outlook, whether those civil society communities are in cooperation with other counterparts abroad widely. And I just want to make one point which is related to Greece, and this is something that we have identified, is that many organizations that function in the field, or what we consider civil society, do not consider themselves as a civil society organization. For instance, there are too many cultural or cultural heritage institutions. You probably have seen some of them in your village or in your neighborhood, whatever, which are civil society organizations, but they don't consider themselves as such for different reasons. So the question is where do you see the focus of it, and whether those organizations are keen on cooperating with the other side, because this is the key issue. If we want to promote a positive agenda, then it needs to have a dialogue with the other side, then it needs to incorporate empathy and other elements, and definitely understanding the topics that are the issues that are at stake. Yeah,
Do you want to start?
Well,
yeah.
I think I have something funny. The most, I forgot the most widely dispersed foundations in Turkey, the civil society initiatives, which is, as you said, in villages, especially in the small districts. These are things called association to build and keep up with the local mosque. I think if you, I don't have the figures, but I'm quite sure they are by far the most widely existing civil society institutions in Turkey. But they don't consider themselves civil society because they don't. Well, first of all, it's a culture. They don't look themselves, to be using this concept and terminology of civil society. Well, it's a kind of a educated segments of the society, maybe center-left wing thinking in Turkey. Those who are in the villages, less educated, more conservative, they wouldn't consider themselves civil society, because civil society in their mind would be something existing separate and sometimes against the state, which is not welcome in that kind of a culture. So they wouldn't consider themselves as civil society institutions, but they are the most widely available institutions. But again, they do only one thing. I mean, whether it's considered, I don't know, conceptually, whether should we include them in civil society or not, just to, the real aim is to build a religious institution. Does it constitute a civil society? Well, I don't know, but that's it. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. And sorry.
Okay, this is very interesting. I was just thinking to myself that when Israel was established, there was a British mandate. There was a British government there, rule. So the first Israeli militias, or sort of before we had a military, we had Haganah and other organizations. Are they considered to be civil society? They were not governmental organizations. So I think the most useful thing I can offer here, with your permission, is to decide first on the role of what is the role of civil society organization. And then after we decide what it is, it's easier to decide which one of the groups is part of it or not. So I would say the most important things we need to remember that civil society organization must serve as either intermediaries between public and the state. So they can be in this role. They could be watchdogs for what the government is doing. They can be service providers. In that sense, perhaps some of your villages could be included, because, if a community considered religious practice as part of their heritage and needs, everyday needs, then why not? A platform for any civic engagement. Also, civil societies in our region plays a vital role given the democratic deficits and governance challenges that exist in some countries. Yes, even in national security issues, sometimes, civil society can have an act. And this is locally, but also there is the international or interregional activities. Civil society can work, and they do work, in order to create a common platform, ease tension, provide services in other countries to different communities. So if you want to add more to this, welcome. But I think these are the important issues that can help us define what is civil society.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to be as a speaker here. I would like to zoom out and due to my experience to speak about in general the Euro-Mediterranean civil society. But before going there, I would like to, as Anat and Mustafa highlighted, to put some definitions on the ground so we can agree or disagree and discuss on certain things about the civil society. I believe the first and foremost, the civil society organizations are from people to people, and they support the government services to citizens. So they complement or they support the government efforts to give services to people. And when we mean services, we mean everything. So the roots of civil society organizations has been discussed before that. It's on philanthropy, on charity organizations. So civil society organizations, they started as philanthropy, so friend of the human or the people, and they develop differently in depending on the history of each country in the Euro-Mediterranean region. So, but they are united for a goal to achieve, which is based on values. So we have grassroots or local organizations, we have national civil society organizations, we have regional and global. And I will briefly give some definitions on that. So we have the grassroots organization can be, for example, a village organization to promote their own culture of the village. In Greece, we have a lot of tiny museums on the culture or the agricultural material or tools they were using in various parts of Greece, for example. We have community organizations that promote concerns. We have neighborhood organizations that promote rights of people living in that neighborhood. On the local level, we have also some to promote social justice. National level, we have, for example, the academia or the universities, the national environmental organizations, the sociocultural organizations, for example, let's say here in Greece, the Lykia των Ελληνίδων, for example, that promote the culture, dances of certain regions of Greece. We have also regional organizations that promote and engage in cross-border cooperation, like the Anna Lindh Foundation, bringing people together for a specific purpose to promote intercultural dialogue, or for example, the Black Sea NGO network to promote various issues related to the Black Sea region. And we have the global or the international organization that promote health, environment, aid, social justice, for example, the Médecins Sans Frontières or the Doctors of the World of the WWF or the Greenpeace. So they are organizations, civil society organizations that represent the people, the rights of the people. They hold power and influence. That's why many attempt to use these organizations or this mobilization of these organizations. For example, governments, politicians, businesses, and that's why they are present in their events. Or sometimes, if you would like to be a bit critical, for some businesses to increase their profile or to increase their influence for more sales. But how these civil society organizations are functioning, they can be, for example, youth-oriented or promote youth engagement, promote peace building and conflict prevention, promote social justice or environmental advocacy, advancing democratic governance and positive change, promoting human rights and social justice, and impact on policy, governance, and future projects, and specifically promote a positive agenda in the Mediterranean. Of course, there's a lot of challenges which we can discuss further on. Thank you.
Just before we move on, would you like, I mean, but till now we have discussed more or less the characteristics and the particularities of the civil society in each part of the world. I would just like to add here something which is related to Greece, and it's mentioned whether how much developed or it's not developed to this one. First of all, in relation to the rest, to some of the countries, like you mentioned, Egypt, probably the Greek civil society community is much more advanced and better developed. But in relation to other parts of Europe, it's less developed and it lags behind. And it looks as if there are two elements that might affect the reason to it, which one of them is really what Mustafa has mentioned in relation to the Ottoman heritage. And it is that A, the family, and B, the church. Those have been two elements that are very powerful in the Greek community, as indeed probably in other Mediterranean European countries, that did not allow for civil society to develop. And the third one is the political parties. The way that it operated with their constituency or with their clientelistic system meant that a lot of the roles that it's up to civil society to perform was performed by those political parties, or let's put it in another way, it was not in the best interest of the political parties that such organizations would exist and they would monitor their proper function. If we consider the political parties are part of the political system and of the state organization, of the state institutions in a way. So this has not allowed for it to develop. Nonetheless, it did develop. The other element what I want to mention, and then maybe you should ask us with regard to this one, is that it's interesting that in this part of the world and in the Eastern neighborhood, civil society was perceived in the Western and the superpowers as one of the institutions that can really promote, and it's a vehicle for democratization and improving the governance and the performance of those countries. At the same time, the performance of civil society is perceived as one of the elements that illustrate the level of democracy in one of the countries, which is a kind of an awkward condition if you see it. It's not related to this one or the other. So would you like to ask something with regard to this one? Because the next thing is whether we haven't defined those clearly. You consider that there are the skills in the civil society to do that on its own, or whether there are needs for partnership. Sorry.
Thank you very much again for this interesting presentation. Yes, I would like to ask something before we continue. Something that Professor Lapidot mentions about legitimacy of civil societies. I'm gonna bring three examples in order to illustrate my point. Because in my mind, legitimacy can take two forms. One is in the mind of the people. So if they actually trust civil society organization, and the second one is in the eyes of the government, of the system, vis-a-vis in a legal framework that protects them or legitimizes them with a formal type. So I will mention three examples and would like your opinion. First of all, in Greece, during the migrant crisis, we've got many NGOs that helped. But after the years, a large part of the population started to distrust those NGOs because there were many scandals in Poland or whatnot. So they lost the legitimacy in the mind of the people. A second example is from Israel. A few weeks ago, I was talking with an Israeli professor that's managed to create a civil society war room, and she was able to use her volunteers in order to identify the hostages. I'm sure you know what the professor is. So they are still working with the government, but so people really trust this organization. But till today, there's not any legal framework to protect them. So the government hasn't officially acknowledged them, but it collaborates with them. And the third one is from Turkey, as you said before, Professor, about the Gülen Foundation, that it has some popular support, but the Turkish government has officially banned it. So In order to wrap up my question, what is the right mix what is the right mix of legitimacy, both from the people's perspective and from the legal, from the country's government perspective? Thank you very much.
The theory or the reality is that civil society cannot and should not be dependent on the government or on the state. Yet the state has the responsibility to secure the framework and the conditions that within which the civil society should operate. I'm just mentioning it as a theory. This is the theory, and probably in the Western countries, especially in the northern Western countries, this is a reality, but that's not necessarily the case. And we have seen it, for instance, in Egypt, after the takeover of the military government that put a lot of obstacles in in external funding to civil society, and not only civil society, to any kind of organizations that operate in Egypt.
Need a microphone. I think everyone can hear me. The fact is that how many of the civil society factors have access to media? Okay, because this is also how government gives access to the civil society in order to promote their agenda and the positive agenda that we are.
This is a very interesting question. What is the mixed right mix? I mean, I think there is, as far as the government is concerned, there are laws and regulations. So if you are acting within that laws and regulations, you have a legitimacy. But of course, having said this, I understand that it depends on the country's democratic processes and independence of judiciary and everything. So you can have written laws, and application will be totally different from one country to another. But that's one issue. And of course, if you look at the Turkish case, it's funny because we have two laws for civil society. One is foundations law, which mainly deal with the foundations that I told you about in general. But then we have associations law, which includes every source of things, actually. Political parties, they are associations. Sports clubs, the big, huge, champion leagues, football clubs, they are all associations. Religious orders establish these associations. It is the easiest form of civil institution that you can establish, or association of International Relations Council that I'm chairing is also an association. So most of civil society in Turkey is organized through associations. But how can we equate a political party like AKP to an International Relations Council of Turkey, which is just for academics? But law, in front of the law, we are all equal. So I think that more important than the legitimacy is how I wouldn't call this equal treatment. A political party going in front of a judge or a real civil association going in front of a judge will not get the same responses. So there is no equality there. It's a problem. On the people level, which is interesting, I think Stefanos mentioned, this is the civil society thing in general is seen in Turkish context, at least, something people who are rebelling against the government and the state who established it. I mean, because you are establishing this institution in order to things outside the government or the state purview, and sometimes against its directions. Here is the two stigmas are attached. One is it shows the culture. One is the money source. Where do you get your money? Is it national money, or you get your money from outside Turkey, or even if you are getting in Turkey, which kind of a institution that you are getting? And the second stigma is your international connections. Just having international connections could become an issue in Turkey. For example, in the past, Dimitrios might remember here, Ronald definitely knows this. German foundations had a stigma over them in Turkey. You work with them, nothing happens. After 20 years, there will be a newspaper article listing the institutions that have been working with FNF, for example. And implication is, they wouldn't say openly, but implication is that you are serving to foreign aid, foreign sources. Now US today, I mean, today US is a great Turkey, bigger Turkey, so that's not a difference here. But that we were there first. We can claim we're the first. But you know, it's the source of money. For example, also Soros, right? It's a very suspicious, obviously, but you know, many others. If you work with the embassies, for example, if you get money from embassies, if you get money from German foundations, etc., etc. So on the face of this also relates to where the power base of the civil society and I mean, power base, the real civic type of a civil society gets its power from its ideas and the things that you want to do, and then you apply for money, projects, and you become a project-driven institution, and then donors, whether domestic or international, actually directs you to certain areas, and that's another problem. But apart from these institutions, if you look at it, most of them, like the mosque institutions, entities, or other type of foundations, their power base is not actually coming from their urge to do civic duty, but it's coming from their ideology or their religious beliefs or being part of the group. So Fethullah Gülen is in that category. They establish associations because this is the most convenient way of establishing a legal entity in Turkey. Because if you have companies, you have to pay taxation, huge taxations. But if you establish an association, it's very low. So they start from this low level, and it's easiest. But motivation, obviously, when you look at this kind of group, is maximization of earnings. So it's really business. And also ideological coherence, because they believe in a certain type of a religious idea. And finally, it's a kind of an identity for them. In that sense, civil society becomes an instrument, not how we see it.
It's not an expression of the
not piety or not philanthropy or anything. It's a part of a you want to be legalized, and this is a way of legalizing what you are doing.
Okay, so there's two questions about the legitimacy and about access to media. On legitimacy, well, we have to understand that in some countries, like Israel, you need to be registered in order to get tax exempt and or to be legal. So there's the issue of registration, and not all civil associations or organizations are registered. Okay, I mean, sometimes they don't need the tax exempt. We don't know their numbers also. About 45,000 NGOs are registered in Israel. I guess about 20,000, up to 20,000 are actually active. 15,000 to 20, because it's easy to register, but then to keep activities is a different issue. So it's a large number of organizations, and they enjoy legitimacy in spite of the fact that most of them are not democratic. They may believe in democratic values, but in the way they operate, they're not democratic. There's sometimes only one person take decisions. Sometimes it's a group of people. Sometimes there are elections, and they change the administration. So there's no requirement to be democratic. It is required that you will not deal with embezzlement, and there are no scandals. Some organizations had problems in the past, but gained a legitimacy again, legitimacy not just from the state, but also from the population they're serving. So it's a very tricky business, the issue of legitimacy. And again, do we ask about their values when we consider them civil society? Do we all agree, all of us, on the same values? It's a big question. Therefore, I rather look at their goals, to decide if they are legitimate, in my opinion, but other people would do it differently. So that's about legitimacy. I'll add one more thing. I think Mustafa highlighted the role of both the philanthropy, but also institutions like all the German Stiftung, the different ones. They're affiliated with political parties in their own countries. So can we do without them? Okay, they contribute a lot to Israeli civil society and to democracy, but they are affiliated with political parties. Do we feel comfortable with this? Well, unfortunately, civil society cannot exist without either philanthropy or such organizations. So we need to constantly juggle, we are juggling between values, needs on the ground, and legitimacy. As for access to media, this is a very important issue that probably more relevant to countries like Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinians. I think, I don't know about Turkey, I'll leave it to you, but definitely in Greece, Cyprus, I mean, there is no problem of access to media, international and local. Also in Israel, there's no problem. We are flooded with media and social media. It's a tool. But in other countries, there is a huge gap between different countries in the region. Is that what you were referring to?
I think that's part of the question. I think it's the inequality within. For example, there are some civil society groups in Greece that have access to media, and some of them that do not. So there's equality within. Not everyone has the same access, and if you want to promote what you do, the people's, so you need some help because you need someone to be heard. And there's also another question here that can civil society work be promoted also on the street, in demonstration? Is this that can the academia, to be heard hand by hand, and in international academia from Israel, Turkey, Palestine, Greece, go on the streets and say we want to create a positive agenda for the Eastern Mediterranean, for example? Is that also a way if they don't have, let's say, access to media or equal,
Okay.
equal
I
opportunities?
I understand the question.
I just want to add something, which is kind of rather not very happy. When Dimitris, we were in Contini in November with the network meeting of the Greek network. So we asked some of the young guys to make some presentations, and one of them, when I heard what she was doing, I thought it was a great idea. And her presentation, because she was a marketing expert, is the use of marketing by civil society organizations and how do we do it. Now, that's fine. The reaction of the public was something sorrow for me. The public was civil society organization and reacted, said, no. It's not possible for a civil society organization to use marketing. Yeah. So this is what we discussed. This is something like they have built a kind of a bubble of what they perceive as civil society, which is their own bubble, and anything else, which is probably a reminiscence of some old left-wing perception of the 60s and the 70s. And they, they see it as of today. And actually, I mean, I thought of it because you mentioned it. If they cannot promote it and the public does not know it, that would be an issue. And because you've mentioned here, I just want to add one last point and then the floor is yours. NGOs is different than civil society organizations. NGOs is part of the civil society community, but we should not always consider them as one and the same. And that's why, very rightfully, because especially during the refugee crisis, a number of NGOs have been involved and they have been accused of doing a number of things. And whereas this has touched upon the whole civil society sector, and that's why in many cases, personally, I'm trying to avoid the use of NGO and use the word of CSO because of this one in a certain way. Yeah. Because
I mean, no one is immune to corruption, whether you are talking about the north or the south of the Mediterranean. I mean, the issue of funding is a serious issue. NGOs cannot have activities unless they have funding, and that's I mean, very few NGOs or civil society organizations are self-sustained, either through an endowment or any other, or through, you know, donations and so on. There are some countries that they have the culture of charity giving more than others in the Mediterranean. But if we're talking about mobilization, let me go back to an example through the use of the social media. The use of the social media gave to the civil society in the Eastern Mediterranean a big space to move, to advertise, to promote itself, and to promote its values and activities. And through mobilization, they managed to have demonstrations. They managed to have impact on policy and governance. We saw in the Arab Spring a lot of change of their regimes. And here comes, we saw, for example, in Turkey with the Istanbul mayor, the mobilization to the people. We saw in Israel the mobilization for the problems in the legal system and so on. But at the same time, we have state security controls for funding. I mean, I will speak. Recently, we saw also how the social media are being manipulated by governments, and how state security, in the name of state security, there is a control of freedoms. I'm not talking only about the Middle East. I'm talking also about the USA. Yes, and also. So we're talking about the south and the north of the Mediterranean. I'll give an example for how an international funding is accepted. For example, in Egypt, you need 21 permits from different governmental or different authorities. In Tunisia, you need 15. I mean, in Greece, maybe you don't need any to have an international funding, to accept an international funding. So there is a lot of and different plethora of different and confusing elements to what we can say the civil society is pure and clean, or the civil society is corrupted. We have all the cases in all the countries. Demonizing, though, the civil society organizations, I think it's not good, because most of them, if I might say, they give services to people, they support basic functions, they support, for example, people in poverty or people in need, and they support also other elements like cultural expression, freedoms, and so on. So there's a lot of challenges for the civil society. The issue is how how the civil society is facing it in order to promote this positive agenda we are talking about.
Thank you. I misunderstood your question before. So there is an organization in Israel called Shatil, and they're responsible to provide services, including training in using social media, media in general, but also management. They're very effective. So anyone who has an organization, an NGO or anything else, is entitled to receive services from them. And we're reaching the point that when you're applying to any money, anywhere, whether it's from philanthropy or the government or municipalities, you need to have a plan that you have to provide to show that you have some kind of business plan that you to include how you're going to communicate your messages, but also social media and negotiation with or appearances in the traditional media. So it's part of the puzzle. I also know that a lot of the foundations, German, Americans, British, and others, Europeans, are requiring such a plan. I think social media is the most important part. I can tell you that I get since recent events, I'm getting messages from 6 different groups every day, twice a day, where I can go to the next, where is the next pop-up location of demonstration, whether it's about the legal reforms or the hostages issue and other issues. So 6 different groups, they're all very active. They're connected in a way. So it's very, very effective. It mobilizes people and the message there. And over there, you do have some kind of democracy or democratic participation, because you can add your comments, you can post in some of them, not all of them. So this is definitely something we cannot do without. And it's becoming very, very crucial, social media. Yeah.
Yeah, this brings us actually to the next topic, and this is how will you consider what are the other institutions that are relevant to the discourse, and therefore and especially independently, but in relation or in cooperation with the civil society, like academia and the other things. And I would also like to, from what we discussed, is that there is a focus on values and so on and so forth. And I just remembered, which is related, how can the role of those partnerships with others be more effective? I just remember reading the book of the Greek public law is Boutaris, Yanis Boutaris, 60 years of winemaking, and he was saying that everybody was not criticizing, telling him, yeah, you are very successful because you really love what you're doing. He said, no, I'm very successful because I have a vision. So this is something that whether such a vision can exist, and can it really exist without having all of them working together rather than each one developing its own vision, and whether other organizations like the Anna Lindh Foundation or other cross-country organizations can function in this one. Just one point I want to raise is that maybe this is a useful perspective of how the civil society organization can function because of the lack of resources, that within the academic reading and where I came across it, and there's a trend to consider part of civil society the social enterprises, because of it's exactly what you said, is we don't start with what they are, but what do they perform rather than what they are. Anat, you identified academia, you identified, so in that respect, which ones are they, how can they work, and whether do you have some good practices, including, I would like to hear from you some Palestinian Israeli case studies.
Okay. So when we come to international or regional activities, I think academia is a major player. Because of its nature, it's international. You can all control ideas and the movement of people in most countries. So they do have a role, and I think many of them are not using enough their resources and their abilities. I think it's lack of understanding of their role and their abilities. So I would like to see more of support to academic regional activities. We do have a lot of them, not very, some of them are successful. I mean, it depends also how do you view success. I mean, for long term, perhaps meetings like that are, maybe beneficial. I've been participating for many years in the Palestinians, Israeli, meetings, and to tell you their success on a personal level, it's a great success. I had a great time. We shared views. Maybe I've managed to convince other people, or not. But at the end of the day, one missile, one military operation, it's all gone. So I'm not sure really, if I can tell you this was a great thing, but we have to continue trying. I do think that think tanks and academic institutions can do a lot. I mean, when it comes to international involvement, they can create forums, long-standing forums that will work together in spite of tension and problems, and there's not a lot of them. I myself am trying to organize something right now. It's not an easy process, lack of funds. This is also something we need to take into consideration. Part of the problem is lack of funds. I would like to see the EU investing more in creating such forum. Annalyn Forum, for example, that was created by the EU, is a very good example, and it's lasting for many years. I would like to see more of them also in academia. As far as the internal, local participation, academia has a major role in Israel. I don't know about Turkey and other countries. I do think they do have some influence. But I can tell you that just one example of recent events, the president of Tel Aviv University initiated a call for all universities, and many of them participated, setting borders and fences to what he described as harming, democracy in Israel. So the whole debate about the legal reforms, and he said, you can debate, it's okay, but in my role as president of a leading university in Israel, I'm telling you that if you're going to dismiss, if the government is going to dismiss the court, or this specific figure that, this is it. I'm going to go for, on a strike. He called all universities to participate. So they do understand themselves now more than ever as those who have some kind of influence and social responsibility, but in international affairs, I don't think it exists. So, maybe they can be mobilized in one way or another. Maybe capacity building for university administration also could be considered as a project for the European Union or other organizations.
Well, I agree. Well, certainly the academia and think tanks, research community have a role to play, both domestically and internationally, and I think they do. And this relates to the question of media access. They have more access to both social media and traditional media and international media, of course, than average citizen who is active in civil initiatives. And just by their profession, the academics and research community are active in those environments in any case. So they have, in a sense, responsibility and also possibility to influence A, the public debate, and B, government policies. Of course, there is a fine line here. Affecting government policy is you can try to do it from outside, or you can become an advisor type of a relationship with the government, and whether then the question becomes whether you still are civil society or not, right? And because having a connection provides you more impact, but you are inside, not outside. So that's a difficult role to define. Of course, we are coming from international relations background, and we are always more skeptical about civil society's influence when it faces the state power. We have seen this in Greek-Turkish relations and in several others, and I always argue that in this neighborhood, which I think includes Eastern Mediterranean, when state decides to do something, it stops everything else. It stops the business, it stops the civil society, everything. However, having said this, when states decides to collaborate or at least stay neutral in conflicting environments, then it's the role of the civil society to enhance the human-to-human connection. Again, Greek-Turkish relation is a typical case here. The state-to-state rapprochement goes to a certain level, and that's it. You have to move beyond it and create individual connections, and that's the civil society's role. The states cannot really do that. But I have no illusion if the states were authoritatively involved, and they can stop these human-to-human connections as well. So I think it's a kind of a intricate type of a relation we need to develop, and we need to work this within this framework.
Continuing this line and saying, my concern, or what I wanted to discuss a little bit, is that the cooperation between academia and civil society, and especially because if we see what you described yesterday on the issues of the agenda, a lot of them, or a lot of the issues can really derail this positive agenda, are in many respects very technical, let's say. So the question is whether there is, or whether there should be more open venues of cooperation between academia and the civil society organizations. And in that respect, probably popularizing science is one of the issues that we should be addressing if that would allow to strengthen the capabilities of civil society to deal with such issues. Yeah.
This touches the concept of advocacy. I mean, and it relates to your question of whether civil society and academics could take the streets and demonstrate. Most of the academics I know, I come across, they tend to think and argue that advocacy is not their business. Right? They are there to study, and they are there to tell the truth to the public, whatever their truth is. And most of the academics prefer non-advocative positions. Some are different, and it's also relates to disciplines. I think I used to study peace studies. So people who are studying the peace studies very pro-advocacy. They take the streets, demonstrate, and everything. But people who are coming from international relations, political science background, they stay away from the streets and concentrate on writing. But of course, the academia has, and think tank community have ability also to decipher the law itself and the ways to go around the law if necessary, or comply with the law, because ordinary citizens sometimes do not able to. And in that sense, I think that in Turkish case, if I take out all these religious orders connected civil society, the rest has the most membership, and especially the leadership positions goes through this more active academics and think tankers. These are the people tend to be also active in civil society institutions.
I have two comments. They're not related and maybe not important, but I'll say it anyway. One has to do with the role of the masses, the civilians and non-professionals in creating science and academia, academic research. We are living in an age of rapid change. So we have people, we have what we call now civic science, okay? People are participating seriously and doing research, collecting materials, whether it's in botany or zoology or anything else, sociology, anthropology. And we tend to ignore it and laugh about it. Academics are a little bit snobbish, right? In nature, not only international relations experts, but in other fields.
We have earthquake experts.
But we cannot ignore it anymore. And you can see that it's starting that off-campus science is entering the campus nowadays in some countries, and I expect it to grow. This is something we need to understand, because also science will become part of civil society activities. It's going to be also important in the international arena. There is a demand that also diplomatic missions will include civil society voices within their operation. We do see some shifts, not a lot, but not enough. So that's one comment I have. The other one is about international organizations like Annalyn. I don't want to upset anyone, definitely not you, Stefano, but when I was in the role of Annalyn, the lead in Israel, I never understood this strategy, because the idea was to create a regional cooperation, a regional thema. At the end, what we've seen is more of an emphasis on local NGOs or civil society organizations, which is very important. In some countries, there's no point of talking about international involvement. There's no capacity for civil society on the ground. So, but at the end of the day, I think that organizations like Annalyn should invest more in creating platforms for regional collaboration. And just just having a representative for one organization in Israel, one in Greece, one in Cyprus, it's not good enough. You need to create activities and platforms that would include think tanks, academia, in order to strengthen their responsibility to fostering in the future regional collaboration. So again, I respect what they do, and they do a lot, but I think they should now focus more on these platforms and training people in places where you do have access to media, to a large audience, okay? Not necessarily local, but large audience, and to train them in that capacity.
Okay. Before I give the floor to Dimitris, I will respond to you and agreeing with me. First, it's an intergovernmental organization. It's not an international organization. Therefore, it has its limitation when you consider that the board of governance is made up of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. B, as a direct effect, this one doesn't mean that the leadership or the managing leadership has the skills of a CEO, and therefore it needs this one. But then I will add, because it takes two to tango, that the responsibility on the side of civil society is also there. And again, when I bring the example of Komotinim, when we were in Dimitris, we had the national network meeting, and my criticism at the end of it, I didn't hear a word from you about what's going on outside there. So there was, this is why I asked initially whether those organizations are willing, are eager, are thirsty to see what's going on the other side of the fence and get involved with them. If we don't cross this one, but probably, reverse it, think global to act local, probably think local and act global would be in the agenda as well. Dimitri.
Yes, in order to highlight some of the challenges for the civil society to promote a positive agenda in the Eastern Mediterranean, I think we have the issue of the values versus corruption. We have the issue of policy and planning and all what it comes from the academia and the think tanks, and how this can be converted into actions. The obstacles that been put by the governments, if they are legal or funding, which suppose the governments to facilitate the civil society because it's actually giving services to people. And also the sustainability of the civil society in terms of the limitation of the international system, the efforts to cut funding to the UN or limited funding from the EU. This can result into a limitation and a challenge to the system of the civil society organization and the support system to the civil society organizations, that actually they cannot have a capacity to fulfill their goals and achieve their values.
Questions? Any sorts of any, I think we brought this, you know, it was more incentives for a discussion and anything that you would like to raise here before we get into the last round of, which is proposal for the future from what we get here, possible in here. Questions? Oh my God, I'm such a wise man. We are such wise people. Yes, please.
Within the same countries, there are differences. They're not all the same. Okay, thank you so much. So this kind of diversification, does it work? Okay. So this kind of diversification that exists within civil societies, in countries, within countries, it can either create, be complementary one to the other and lead to a positive agenda. I'm just trying to keep it in subject, or it can create a gap that your civil society is not as ethical as mine, or your values or your goals or your mission is not as clear as mine. And so there's a challenge, another challenge here within civil society, and whether we can assess and, you know, create, I don't know, not a hierarchy, but what makes a civil society a good one, you know?
Another question, but I can respond to it. With an example in Turkey. I mean, this classification of civil society, of course, everybody has their own view of civil society institutions, and, you know, I classify them. But one example in Turkey is we have this famous several iterations, Nightingale Lovers Associations. The bird, Nightingale Lovers Association. So by law, it's a civil society institution, and you can come across this in different districts and different people. Why they do this? Because associations are allowed to open locals, so free of charge, and they open place, and they go there and don't pay taxation, and they operate coffee house, for example. But it is a civil society institution. If you look at the numbers, they are included, and we have several type of this. So, how you are going to compare this institution with another institution which is dealing with cerebral palsy, the sickness, right? You're trying to heal or help the people who are sick. I mean, so we need to have some sort, even within the civil society, we need to have some sort of a classification, don't we? I mean, of course, it's the liberal attitude that everything is included and we are all civil societies, but come on, sports club and the club and the association who are trying to enlarge the education in the country. Are they the same things? I mean, how can we consider them same things? This is not a question, of course, it's a comment.
It's really, it really brings me to the last part, which is really whether the civil society organization, civil society community can function independently of each other within, if they want to play a role, which means that they need a certain degree of first of all, perceive themselves as part of this community, which we mentioned earlier on, and then move on. One of the rule of thumb within civil society is that we've got differences, but we have to resolve our differences in a peaceful manner, because because it goes without saying that you have the right to exist in this community as well as I do. So if you have differences, they have to be resolved in a peaceful manner. And then something that at least there was an attempt to do it in Greece within the social enterprises community is create, if that's the case, a code of conduct. And therefore, then we come into those issues that we cannot expect even pressure the government or the states to regulate their own operation, and therefore not allowing those or limiting the corruption and limiting them becoming a Trojan horse for other activities. So there's a lot to be done domestically within the civil society community, but first of all, they will have to realize that they are a community and they can serve, and the existence or not of vision, where probably such organizations, as you mentioned, of the Anna Lindh Foundation, others can facilitate this role. And then maybe, and this is where I'm asking, and this is what I started for when we discuss it, is that not anymore civil society, but civil society, academia, or the partnership of the willing in order to offer this positive input into the dialogue. So just wrapping it up, we want to consider whether we can come up with certain ideas of where do we move on from here, from this activity onwards. And this is open to you as well, whether you would like to raise something. Anat.
I'm sorry, I was
Distracted.
not focused, but because immediately when you started, I started to think about, in relation to what you said, I started to think about possible organization that I would not like to see within civil society. So, and the whole discussion all over the world now about freedom of speech is related to it. It's not just freedom of speech, freedom to act from a very narrow point of view. Would the civil society organizations in Greece approve an organization that is considered to be illegitimate in neighboring country? Let's say the Fethullah Gulen is a good example, or an organization that caused to the destruction of the Israeli state. Is that, organization that were created now, calling for, create from the river to the sea, freedom for Palestinians. Is that a legitimate organization or not? Okay, so we're entering a very, very problematic and very sensitive arena. It also gives governments, the possibility to control what we do. So, in my opinion, we should be flexible as possible, providing we're working for a positive agenda in the fields of freedom and the field of without harming anyone else, of course, and in providing support to different societies and organizations. But again, I do understand that we are reaching the point where our internal beliefs are in question. Okay, what is more important? My group of affiliation, security, or freedom of speech. I mean, it's very, very problematic and very You know, it's caused a lot of tension, and I think we are just at the beginning of it, of this process, and we'll need to take some decisions in the future.
No idea for the future.
Famous last words.
Famous last words. Let's close all the civil society and be happy with it. No, I mean, I think we talked quite a lot. Apart from just reiterating what I already said, we need some sort of a regulation within, not the government regulation, that's already there. And I think it's not helping in any country. Right? I know Turkish case exactly, and it's usually the government regulation destroys the balances within the civil society for the benefit of what I would call wrong type of civil society organizations than the good type. You know, the example of this Nightingale lovers will have no problem with abiding the law because they are earning the money there, you know, by gambling and etc. But while the others are struggling to get legitimate money to support their activities. So I'm not meaning the government regulation, but the civil society somehow should come together and come to some sort of an understanding about what is really civil society and what is not. You know, some sort of an acceptance, or I know this is arbitrary, it looks like arbitrary, but I don't see any other way. Otherwise, you are just mixed with everything, you know, the politics and religion and business and real civil activities. So I'll stop there.
I'm not very optimistic about the civil society and how it can achieve a positive agenda in the Eastern Mediterranean, unfortunately, because the challenges are more than the opportunities in place, and the limitations are more than the options the civil society have in order to develop and execute its reason of existence. Sorry, it's very not very optimistic conclusion, but we have to think on how it can the civil society can have a positive agenda, and this is we are in times that they are not really good times for the civil society.
Okay. Just before I finalize, I'll come back to what you have mentioned, whether in theory, again, or the theory of international civil society organizations, and follows is that it can civil society organizations that do not support peaceful solution coexistence are not part of civil society. So in that respect, it's really related to what Mustafa has said, is the regulation or internal regulations in order to have this one. And again, as I've said, and because of the profile, the image of what your society should look like with mine might differ, and we should coexist, then there is the need of debating, discussing this one. And this is probably one of the issues that I realize that a lot of us are missing, and probably even in our education system, how to talk to each other, how to have a discussion. And this is why within the Anna Lindh Foundation, when I was initially against it, but then I found out the usefulness, it was creating the debate clubs. Whereas the debate club is not a win-lose situation, it's something that they have opposing views, but they have to develop it, and you have to convince the audience with arguments, which means that you are able to develop the arguments and discuss with the other, and the audience is able and open enough to listen to what has been said according to arguments rather than according to where do you come from. Okay, so I think we've run out of time, and I think we used all of it, and this is good. Thank you very much for everything. I would like to introduce again our speakers, because I didn't do that in the beginning because of different things. So on the one hand, Professor Mustafa Aydin, Professor of International Relations from Kadir Has University in Istanbul, President of the International Relations Council of Turkey, and the coordinator of the Global Academy, which shows the double role that you have mentioned in a certain way, the academic versus the civil society as well. He served as a rector of Kadir Has University, where I actually met him. He's a guest researcher at Michigan, Harvard, and Athens University, and Richard Institute for Peace and Studies. And his main topic is, of course, international politics, foreign policy analysis, and security issues related to the Caucasus and the Black Sea in the Middle East. And hopefully, we might have created an incentive to open up to the civil society issues, at least as a trainer for the civil society capacities. Nightingales, yes. And that Lapidot, on the other hand, is a Fulbright Commission director. She has been also the academic director of the Mediterranean program at the Van Leer and Jerusalem Institute. She is founding editor of the Journal for Levantine Studies, and she has also been the coordinator or the head of the Israeli National Network, the Anna Lent Foundation, where we actually met. And of course, she taught Middle East Studies and Turkish Studies at the Department of International Relations of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And last but not least, Dimitris, a Greek from Alexandria, and also a member of the Greek community over there, at the both of them. And recently has been a research associate at this here, but also until recently an academic associate of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, where his focus of research was the Eastern Mediterranean energy resources and international security guarantors. He has also worked at the Anna Lindh Foundation as the secretariat, which is in Alexandria, but also at the Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Alexandria. Thank you very much for your participation and inputs, and hopefully, as Humphrey Bogart said, this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship. Thank you very much.